Mistrustful. Let's win.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, you may have heard Tell. They're going to be an election. This is our election guy. He's been with us all this campaign season. Last push, buddy. We get to finish it off. Joe Szymanski, electionsdaily.com. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It's a day before the election. Who can believe it? Right there at the end. I don't think anyone can. It's been a long cycle for sure. I think it feels like it's been a long cycle to a lot of people who've been following along here, but we're at the finish line finally. So
yeah. And for the podcasters that aren't watching on YouTube, which you ought to be though, because we look fantastic. He's all geared out in his Phillies gear because he's a Pennsylvania guy. So we'll talk about that later. Let's start big picture though, because I think it's really important. We just go election cycle to election. Like we're going to start talking about, obviously we're not going to be done with this tomorrow. This is going to linger for a day or two. We may have a couple of runoffs here in the next couple of weeks. We're just going to seamlessly transition into the presidential election in 2024 because that's just the beast now, right? Let's pause for a second though. You analyze this stuff. You do the numbers. Midterms are different. We keep hearing it. We haven't actually talked about it. So let's go back because the 2018 was the last midterms. A lot of these same seats, these are the same seats. A lot of them's the same candidates, or now they're incumbents that are going to switch hands or not switch hands. There is a cycle to midterms that runs underneath everything else that's going on, and that's where you got to start when you're analyzing this stuff.
Yeah, so I think there are always two key things with midterms. One, for the party that lost the White House, whether that be Republicans or Democrats, they really see it as their first big opportunity to make a statement once again in the federal government. Because if, under these circumstances here, without that, this is how they do it. This is their way of saying, hey, we want to take back some sort of power and get back to, a government where we have some influence, because that's usually how it is. Obviously, this cycle is a little bit different. We have a tied Senate. Obviously, we're at a 50-50 tied Senate, so that makes things different already. And Republicans are starting from an unusually high position in their United States House total. They have 213 seats currently. That's only 5 away from the bare simple majority of 218 in the United States House of Representatives. So it's kind of an interesting thing this year. I've heard a lot of people talk about, if Republicans only gain, 20 to 30 seats, that's not a wave election. But we have, if you go to the high end of that and you have Republicans gaining 30 seats, that's from 213 to 243. That would actually be more seats than Democrats had after their wave election in 2018. And the second big thing is turnout. Every midterm election, obviously it does look like we're going to have probably a pretty high turnout midterm here. It's what it sounds like. But also the fact is that there are certain folks who just don't turn out for midterm elections. So turnout's lower as well. So that makes things harder too, because you've got to try and model and look at these things in a way where you can say, okay, if turnout's down here or here, what does that mean for certain candidates? And we saw that a lot in 2018, where just in certain places, Republicans didn't show up. Well, Democrats really did take it to the tumbler. Some Republicans just didn't show up in some areas across the country, and that's what cost them the elections.
Yeah, and it's interesting perspective you put on there, because just numbers-wise, 2018, Democrats went up plus 41. That looks like a huge number, but you have to put the perspective, and it was, to their credit, it was a huge number. That was a wave election by any definition for a lot of reasons. There's the Trump factors, a lot of other things. But there's also the underneath you say of like where you start to flip that number. Because sometimes you can, like I remember my first election was a midterm election, 98. That's the impeachment election. They only gained like 10 or 12 seats, but that was a massive swing because it never had happened before in an off midterm year that you would lose seats like that. The margins really matter when it comes to these midterm elections, and the perspective matters.
Yeah, and of course, to top it all off with this cycle, of course, we're coming into a redistricting cycle, of course. This is the first time since 2002 where a midterm is starting off under the new maps. Obviously, last decade, 2010, 2012, which was the first cycle under the previous, most of the previous iterations of congressional maps we had. That was a presidential election. Things are a little bit more funky then. While we come with this cycle, so that adds another layer of intrigue to this, is that we have a lot of new seats. Some people have some really new areas, and I think that's kind of been under discussed. Actually, I think sometimes you're kind of looking at this, at pure partisan baselines here, and that doesn't always match up because some of these people have really new areas, and it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how those areas react to their new maybe swing district status or where they are located.
Yeah. Joe Szymanski from elections-daily.com. Usually we promote the site at the end of the interviews. I want to do it right now, though, because of what you just my congressman was redistricted. I've been in one congressional district. I was in another this time. It's the first time I've been in a different one in a long time. You guys actually on elections-daily.com, you have tools for this stuff. You've got maps, you've got interactive stuff, you've got the shuffler where you can try to figure out, what they need to do for the margin. Talk about a couple of those tools, because what you just talked about, that stuff's kind of hard to find. When you Google search it, the news stories pop up. Y'all actually got, and we've been with you all since you started the site. Tell a couple of those tools, because this is one of those things where you really do need to look at the maps and things like that, don't you?
Yeah, so I would say the big thing, I think, is our election shuffler. This is still one of my favorite tools to use. It's where we have data now going back to the 2012 election. We have data from the 2012, 2016, and 2020 presidential elections, and using that, you can, as the name of the tool implies, you can shuffle the margins in counties, and you can shuffle the turnout that comes out in those counties. And the turnout aspect of this really is what makes it interesting, because, like I said, you can shuffle it to what really bad turnout is, to mediocre turnout, to really good turnout. You kind of see where the margins need to be for certain candidates to win in certain key areas in certain states. We don't have it by congressional district yet. That's something we may be planning for the future, but we don't have that ability yet. But for now, you can go at a statewide state basis and see kind of the numbers that candidates need to hit in certain states and key counties to get victory and see wins in elections. And we've used it ourselves, of course, to help us in analyzing some of the key states along the way and seeing, okay, if we want to talk about it like this, what's the hit, where these candidates going to need to kind of hit these markers to see success. And allowing you to use it sometimes shows, wow, this candidate really has such a tough hill to climb. Really hard for us to see him winning, even if this candidate does really well. We've done that for New York, even, and there's been a lot of talk about the New York gubernatorial election. Can Lee Zeldin pull it off? And we've looked at the shuffler, and we've given him, some of the best results you can get in key areas. Hudson Valley and Westchester and upstate New York and Long Island and New York City. And even then, he's still losing by about 7% to Kathy Hope, to a Democrat in that situation. It's one of those things that you look at, and it's just very, very hard to see a Republican winning statewide in New York. And that's what the shuffler allows you to do. You can kind of see, wow, we did 20-point shifts in Long Island, a 15-point shift in the city, 20-point shifts upstate in the Hudson Valley, and still it wasn't enough for him. So, that's kind of the where and how it is. And it's one of my favorite tools to use. And I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in that side of it to use it. And it's going to be a great and helpful resource for you for sure.
Yeah, Joe Szymanski, elections-daily.com. He's also on the Twitter. We're going to link to all those things, by the way. That raises, you just brought it up, something like New York. Y'all actually had a piece on elections-daily. I will link to this as well, but it asked the question, is all politics still local? Well, in a midterm, it really is, because we're dealing with House seats and we're dealing with Senates, although, states are still local elections in a lot of ways. You're dealing with a lot of AGs. We've got a lot of governor races. I know when I looked at my ballot, because I've already voted for early voting because I've got appointments, my ballot was probably 3/4 judges. Literally, like 3/4 of it was different judges, and then county commission, because the way we do it where I live is they're at-large bids, so you got 3 for each at-large. So, that's a lot of your ballot, just real estate. Talk about that still, because everything's nationalized. We're all doing it. You do it for your website. I do it for my radio and my website writing, because that's how you get the clicks. But we have kind of lost that, and I think you're right to point it out, that these elections are still local, and if you don't get a local flavor on some of these, you can get caught up in a bad narrative in a hurry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to point out too that this is just kind of a thing that happens too. For whatever reason, gubernatorial elections are not as, I don't want to say less polarized. I don't know if that's necessarily the right word, but they're less nationalized. If you kind of look at numbers, obviously you look at Republican chances in places like Oregon this year. That seems to be a state where they're really kind of looking to take advantage of a situation there. And you don't really think of Oregon as a place that can elect a Republican governor. But in most of the past 30 years of elections and gubernatorial elections in Oregon, they've been within 5 points, even as the state has taken a pretty massive shift to the Democrats. And it's kind of the same thing for Democrats in New York, and I mean not in New York, excuse me, in Kansas. It looks like right now Laura Kelly might seems to be trending towards maybe being the small favorite to keep her seat and to keep her governorship under Democratic control in Kansas. That's just kind of how it's going to go sometimes. Sometimes these gubernatorial races, people pay attention to them more. They're more focused on certain key issues because, in all honesty, they just have a greater effect on their day-to-day lives. So these gubernatorial races, and even these judge races, these state-level elections, there's less polarization. There's still less nationalization. They're more polarized and more nationalized than they have been before, but they're not to a point yet where you can always say that gubernatorial races are going to follow the usual partisan guidelines in some, states, because, if something gets bad enough, people will decide to change directions when it comes to these gubernatorial races. And we're seeing that in some states this year.
Yeah, Joe Szymanski joining us. Okay, before we get into the breakdown state by state, race by race here, we're going to take the headline ones. Let's have a little fun, buddy. Let's play a little over-under. What do you say? So 2018, we already talked about it, to 2022. We're going to do over-unders. I'm going to give you the 2018 midterms. You tell me if we go over-under. Sound like a plan?
That sounds awesome.
So the U.S. Senate went plus 2R in 2018. Over-under plus 2R in 2022.
Oh.
So that's a tough one because
I think it's going to be one.
I think it's going to be one or two.
Really tough one to start off with.
That's right where I would put it. I think it's going to be like 1.5, 2.
That because I would say under, because you've kind of got three states.
I think it's one. I think it's going to wind up being a +1 for
you've got 4 states right now really that are the key Senate races, and that's Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona, all of which are held by Democrats, and then Pennsylvania, which is the one that's held by retiring Republican Pat Toomey. That's close right now. No, I don't know. It's hard for me to see a Republican sweep of all that. That would be a +3. I think, that's hard. I'm going to go, if I could say even, I could say even too, but I would say right now I would go with under at this point.
Yeah, that one. Funny how the more things change, the more they stay the same, huh? That's right about where you'd have it. This one's going to be a little easier. The House, we already mentioned it, +41D in 2018. Little different maps, of course. Of course, there's been redistricting as well. Over under +41D.
Definitely under. I think that one there.
So let's face it this way: are the R's going to get 40 seats? Because I don't think they're going to get that.
No, I would vote under for that too. I think right now where I'm looking at it, I think I see somewhere between 20 or 30 seats. But again, I would err caution in saying that's not like a big deal. 20 seats again would already put Republicans at 233 seats, and that's I think the low end of what we're going to get. The high end of that 243 seats, that would be more seats than Democrats had after their 2018 midterms. So like I mentioned early on today, don't just look at the numbers of totally gained seats, because again, Republicans in the House are starting from an unusually high position because of an unusually successful House period in 2020.
And it matters which seats too, because 10, 12, 15, that's not really much of a majority because you get so much bleed off. All right, here's a fun one you mentioned a couple of these races already. Governors 2018, the D's went +7. Where do you see the governor races over under +7 change?
I think it'll be under. I think it'll be under that. Yeah, I don't see it going any higher than 5, quite honestly. I think actually changing hands. I'll go with under 7, I think, this time.
Yeah, good one there. All right, here's a very important one. You've already mentioned it. You talked about using it on tool turnout. Turnout in 2018 was 49.4%, just under 50. For context, that was the highest in over a century. You had to go back to 1912 to get that high turnout. Now, the Virginia special election, the presidential election, the other special election, we're seeing a trend up in turnout, over under 50% turnout. We'll just round it off.
I'm going to go slightly over.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we're going to have surprisingly high turnout for this, but you give me your reasoning on that.
I just think I think there have been so many voting laws that have been changed to that it's no longer all E-Day in a lot of these states. The early voting laws have been changed in so many of these states because of somewhat a good chunk of them because of COVID. And those laws that were changed are still in place. That's not a bad thing. I want to point out it's not because of COVID that these laws are still in place, but because they were popular and to a certain amount of states. And I think that's just going to drive turnout in the end. You know, people have different options, and I think there's an enthusiasm aspect as well where I think the growing base number I think is growing and exceedingly enthused with every election.
Yeah, here's a fun one. Overall spending, the 2018 midterms was $5.7 billion. Over under $5.7 billion in spending.
Over because I think Georgia's going to go to a runoff, and I think we're going to see another crazy amount of money be dumped in for those 6 weeks there.
I saw a thing yesterday where Beto O'Rourke and Stacey Abrams, just between the two of them, have raised over $150 million.
Yep.
And neither one of them have led in a poll yet.
Nope, that's correct.
That is an astonishing stat. And they've got $150 million. It's amazing. All right, this one's a little more on the fun side. So 2018 to 2022, talking about Congress here, we've had 2 impeachments. So over under before the next midterm in 2026, we have 2 impeachments. Over under.
I'm going to go the hopeful way here, and I'm going to say under.
I have no idea. I think we're going to get one automatically. We're going to get the bounce back impeachment because somebody's going to want to do that. But I don't know if we'll get 2, but it'll be funny. I want to throw an easy one in there. Joe Szymanski. Okay, let's dig into a few of these. Let's start with your bailiwick, Pennsylvania. Here's where I'm at on this. You know, in Vegas and sports, if something screwy happens, star quarterback gets hurt, there's a scandal, coach gets fired, something, the betting, they'll take it off the board. They'll just take it off and say, look, this is too outside the box. We don't know. We can't obviously put odds on it. We're going to take it off the board. That's where I'm at with Pennsylvania. I think we're so far off the board with this race. Oz, Fetterman, the debate fallout, the Oz stuff. I think we should just say this is beyond. I don't think this is even a political election anymore. I think it's just a hot mess. I would just take this off the board and say, I have no idea what's going to happen here. You're there, you're following it. I get the feeling Oz is maybe getting a bump here right at the end after the debate, but I don't know. But am I wrong for just thinking that way about this race?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a point to that. You know, this has been a race that I think the summer horse race period, I think sold something to a lot of people that I never personally thought was true, and I was happy that we kind of stood by that. I figured this would be a close race to the very end since day one, and I think I've been proven pretty right on that. There's just so many different factors. Obviously, of course, Oz's negatives are still pretty well on the tank. Fetterman, of course, is still dealing with the after effects of a pretty nasty stroke. Yeah, it's been a thing. You know, I was able to go back home this past weekend though. I go to school in Virginia at George Mason University, but I went back home this weekend because the post office sent my absentee ballot back to home because they didn't like my new apartment address in Virginia, so I had to go up there and complete my ballot. But you know, I for the first time ever, I really saw, and I will say where the parts that I go up through, this is mostly pretty Republican parts of the state, of the South Central part of the state, but I saw the most Oz signs up. I would probably say for the first time ever, I saw the more Oz signs than Mastriano signs in this part of the area that were up and on people's lawns and on the highway and the side of the streets and everything. I probably saw more this past weekend than I have in any other time I've had to come home this year. So one of those just really interesting things that you've seen here. Uh, it's just going to be close. I'm not going to say anything because you'll see it in our final ratings that we're releasing today on Monday, the day before the election. You'll see what our final call is. But it's going to be really close. I think all of us decide things probably going to be within a point or two of the final margin. More than that, we'll be pretty surprised. But this is just a race that has probably the most outside factors that are not necessarily political coming into play here. And that makes it a very hard race to kind of dissect for sure.
Yeah, this is one of those two where if the turnout number moves 3, 4, 5 points, this race changes a whole lot too. Let's stay in Pennsylvania for a minute. It looks like Shapiro has pretty much put Mastriano away at this point. We'll call those self-inflicted wounds without having to get into too much of the muck surrounding his candidacy. GOP just shot themselves in the foot. Let's just call it what it is. This everybody said if you elect this guy, you can just pencil in Shapiro. That's pretty much what it looks like is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, we would have to take a pretty big shift in the data, pretty big, massive data miss for Mastriano to win at this point. There is a pretty clear amount of split ticket voting going on right now in these two races. Like I said, gubernatorial races, not as polarized, not as nationalized yet. There are definitely groups of people who are upset at the Biden administration, want to vote Republican, but just refuse to vote for Mastriano, who is really more than any candidate in the country this year, really gone all in on Christian nationalism, something that I think is not something that is acceptable to a broad swath of people that you need to get to win Pennsylvania. That's just kind of a fact on that there, and he's really kind of made that his movement, and it's not working, and it's really a struggle right now for him. And yeah, Republicans shot. I was on that train from the very beginning. I wrote 3 articles on it saying, "Hey, if we nominate this guy, things are going to go poorly," and lo and behold, things have gone poorly. It's just a situation. It is what it is, and the voters are very much making their opinions known on this. That they are willing to vote for Republicans and they're willing to put them in office in Pennsylvania. But Doug Mastriano is a pretty clear red line in that regards for a key block of voters.
Joe Szymanski joining us, our election guru. You already mentioned this. So from one state that went pretty much how we thought it was going to go gubernatorially, the one that's surprising a lot of people, New York, you already mentioned it. Kathy Hochul's the incumbent, but she's not an elected incumbent because, of course, the Cuomo mess. I got to imagine that's got a little bit of after effect here. For folks that don't know, Lee Zeldin is a very well-known political entity in New York. This isn't some outsider coming out of nowhere. Folks know who this guy is. He's ran for multiple different offices. You already mentioned it, though. The numbers just aren't there. He's going to be a lot closer than what people thought he's going to be. But no, a Republican is not going to win the governorship in New York right now. This is not the return of the Cuomo years. He's done, and it's going to be what, 5, 7, 8 points, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe higher.
I think 8 to 10 points. The fact is, if he hits like 43, 44%, that is truly a pretty incredible performance for a Republican in New York, statewide. It's been a pretty long time since a Republican statewide in New York has really hit the kind of mid 40s in terms of percentage. If Zeldin does hit that, more power to him, quite honestly. That would be pretty impressive on his part. But like I said, it's just the numbers aren't there. Unless we see something in New York City that is crazy, like Lee Zeldin wins the borough of Queens or something, because Asian voters there have just become so tired of Democrats that they decide to just vote Republican. We just totally missed it. Then unless that happens, then Lee Zeldin is not going to win.
Joe Szymanski joining us. Let's go to a house race real quick in Virginia. It fits into how we opened, though. That class of 2018, that blue wave. Punchbowl actually highlighted this the other day, and I thought it was really interesting. Abigail Spanberger's seat, hotly contested seat. She was one of those. She's more of a moderate Dem. She has a lot of national security credentials. She is not a progressive. She is pretty blunt and open about it, too. She's really in a fight to try to hold on to her seat. She's one of those wave kids from 2018 that look, every midterm, these look like the seats that just kind of switch back and forth. That's kind of a microcosm of how midterms goes. Like, look, you can be the hotness in one midterm, by the next one, you're just on the wrong side of the tide going out. That's kind of what she's fighting, isn't it?
Absolutely. The 7th district is really interesting too because it's totally basically moved positions. It used to be a Richmond suburbs district. It is now a kind of Northern Virginia exurbs, plus some parts of the Piedmont area. I'm talking about like Culpeper, Orange, and Greene counties, right above Charlottesville there, and Albemarle County. It's a very interesting seat. It has a it takes in probably some of the bluest parts of Prince William County, its eastern sector. The part that's always been more Democratic leaning, takes in Stafford and Spotsylvania counties and Fredericksburg City, which have been trending more blue. Stafford went for Democrat for the first time in a long time in the presidential race in 2020. Then you kind of have, like I said, these Central Virginia counties, Culpeper, Greene, Madison, and you also have some to the east. You also have parts of Caroline County and Prince George County, I believe is what it's called there. A little bit of an eastern, kind of an eastern shore county there to the east. It's a very interesting seat. It went for Joe Biden by just around 7 points, went to Glenn Youngkin by around 6 points. This is a seat that really isn't necessarily going to depend on Prince William, but really going to kind of depend on Stafford and Spotsylvania County. It's a place where it's a more white population. It's also a relatively educated population. There's some suburban aspects to it. There's some exurban aspects to those counties. What it's going to come down to is, can Spanberger survive in those counties? Can she, if she does lose Stafford, can she not lose it by a bad enough amount that it causes her to lose the seat? And can she kind of keep the margin in Spotsylvania as well relatively close? If she doesn't do that, could be a bad night for her, and a really kind of a sign of things to come for Republicans across the country. If she does hold on, then it's going to come down to that she was able to, message in this seat well. I think she's done a very good job. I have to admit that she's done a very good job of that, and trying to make sure she keeps a hold on this seat. It's a very interesting seat, though. Like I said, and this is one of those clause of redistricting here. She's moving from her base in Henrico in the Richmond suburbs now to this kind of, like I said, this Noval suburb excerpt seat, and going to see how that works out for her.
Yeah, she famously knocked off David Brad. He would probably pay cash money to run in this district as opposed to the one he lost to. It's just, but that's exactly how this goes. And now she's in with, Vega, Yesley Vega, as an incumbent because it's a redrawn district. This is just the name of the game when you get into redistricting. You wind up with these kind of races where you won in one district and you've just got to completely adjust. She looks like she's put a lot of the groundwork in. This is just the name of the game, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like I said, this is the weird thing about it. It's a midterm, and it's also the first cycle in redistricting. That just makes for some totally different races than what we would see previously.
Yeah. Joe Szymanski, let's continue our Eastern Seaboard tour real quick. Just kind of keep some kind of structure to this god-awful mess of a midterm that we're going to be voting on. North Carolina, Senate seat, Richard Burr, scandal. He's stepping aside, so it's an open seat. We have Ted Budd, and we had the shock endorsement of him. And then the more shocking thing is he won his primary without actually running in it, but we'll talk about that some other time. He's up against Sherry Beasley, who is a Supreme Court justice who got voted out in part of the last statewide red wave where they cleaned out the Supreme Court over redistricting, of all things, was one of the hot issues in that. There's a lot of cross streams here. Beasley's actually a really good candidate running the Kay Hagan playbook. I got told that by my buddy Chad, who's been doing North Carolina politics for decades. He's exactly right. She's run very moderately, ran a good campaign. This state is leaning a little red this cycle, though. I think it's an uphill battle. How do you see it, though?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's just going to be it's just a very tough uphill battle for Beasley, and I think adding on to that, she lost incredibly narrowly in 2020. So we lost, I think, by around 500, 600 votes. But even though that's still someone who the voters rejected in 2020, and that's something that's hard to come back from. And the year that it is doesn't make it any easier. As well as you look at polls, there just really hasn't been any polls for her that have been over 44 or 45% for her. There's a threshold there that she has really struggled to cross. It's really hard for me to see her pulling this out again, unless we have some massive data miss again here. Very hard for me to see Beasley pull this one out.
Yeah, Ted Budd's interesting. I actually interviewed him back right before the primaries for our radio partner. You want to talk about a dude that just sticks to his message? I'm endorsed by Trump. Hey, have you heard about illegal immigration? And then he has a whole bunch of, Club for Growth ads. That's been his whole campaign. It's amazing. But it's worked. I said I didn't think it was going to work in the primary. It worked. I was wrong. He was right. He said to me in an interview, he said, look, we know our data. We know what we're doing. We're touching our key 50 counties, and we're going to win. And he did. And it looks like he's going to win again. So he was right. I was wrong. And it looks like he's going to be the senator from North Carolina. Let's move on down the East Coast. Hot Georgia. This is a little surprising. We have the Brian Kemp-Stacey Abrams rematch. When you have a race that everybody knows all the particulars, when it's a rematch like this, everybody knows pretty much everything about the candidates. I started looking for other factors. About 5-6 weeks ago, we started hearing some backbiting from the Democratic side about Stacey Abrams and her campaign and her fundraising and these sorts of things. When you're going to have a decently close race, let's say 5 points over or under for that one, that's something I start paying attention to. Like, okay, why are you hearing backbiting? Because there's no such thing as a leak. People are putting that out there. Sounds like there's some blame shifting in the Abrams camp. That's not a confidence builder thing. It feels like Kemp has separated a little bit to get a little breathing room and is going to win this thing. How do you see it?
Yeah. So this is the rare situation where, of course, this was the story in Georgia over the summertime, where really, other than Herschel Walker, Republican primary voters pretty thoroughly rejected former President Trump's endorsements in open and key races. Not a lot of them won. In fact, I think almost he lost both Republican congressional districts that were open. He endorsed candidates there. He lost both of them. He endorsed candidates against incumbents in row offices. He lost all those, and he endorsed David Perdue against Brian Kemp, and he lost that. And of course, the big upset was the Secretary of State race, where he wanted to put all the chips in the bag against Brad Raffensperger, and Raffensperger survived. So
not to interrupt you, does that have to be I think that's the most surprising election of my entire lifetime was Raffensperger not only winning it outright. Like it wasn't close. That was shocking to me. That's one of the most shocking elections I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was that was definitely the biggest shock of the primary season and probably of any primary season for the last couple of decades here. One of the most surprising was Raffensperger surviving that after everything that had been thrown against him. But the fact is that primary allowed Kemp to kind of separate himself, unlike Herschel Walker, from certain aspects of the Trump presidency and Trump himself that people do not like. And the thing is, he's a popular governor. He's got an above 50% approval rating. Usually pretty hard to beat governors when they have that approval rating on them. It's been pretty hard to beat them. So, yeah, it's just Kemp has ran this race in a way that's very good. Stacey Abrams, I think, unlike Kemp, I don't think the last 4 years have helped her necessarily. She has certainly grown a national profile, but in some ways that's hurt her, I think, a little bit. She's coming under some criticism for the spending usage from her Fair Fight PAC. There's been questions about what she's actually done in terms of actually fighting, I put that in quotation marks, voter suppression. There's been a lot more questions around Abrams, and, as Georgia becomes a more blue state, maybe the time will come for her, but this is also a race where I think is a race where certain people get upset at her and kind of say, okay, you've had your chance. It's time for someone else to go the next time we have this.
Joe Szymanski. Let's stay in Georgia. Okay, this was the story post 2020 election. The the runoff elections in Georgia is just one of the messiest political things we probably have and or will ever see. One of those was Senator Raphael Warnock got his Senate seat. So he's running again for the full term now. It's only been 2 years. I was one of those that told a lot of our Republicans, and I was like, hey, that's going to be a tough out because that race was ugly. It got personal, and we're going to basically roll right into doing it all over again. Walker, we know all the problems there. Raphael Warnock, he's got some problems there too. I think the turning point on this race that closed it back up and got it close again was, we talked about it last time I spoke to you, about 8 weeks ago or so. Walker started taking outside advisory help. Didn't get a whole lot of headlines, but unlike J.D. Vance and some others, he got some help in. They changed their debate strategy. Remember, they lowered the expectations, which that always works. Because you can't, because it's like, it makes the other opponent, damned if they do and damned if they don't. If you don't knock them out, you're not good enough. And so all they had to do was show up, not fall over. That happened outside of the badge incident. This is going to be a very, very close Senate race any way you slice it. I think Warnock survives it though. But what do you think?
I think we're going to be talking about this again.
When you think we're doing a runoff again?
I think this is going to a runoff. I would be shocked. I know there are people at Elections Daily who don't want to rate this. I would almost rate this as a likely runoff situation. Not safe. It's not impossible that maybe either one of these two can pull it out. But I think we're hitting, I think, a point where we're at an 80-85% chance that this race goes to a runoff, I think. And I think I'm going to be right back with you here on the winter break in my room, in my office, in the family office back home in Pennsylvania, probably talking with you the night before when that runoff happens right after Christmas time. I'll probably be here talking with you the details of that race, quite honestly.
Yep, and we know because we just did it. Well, I mean, it's 2 years ago now, but it feels like we just did it. It feels like we just talked about it. Who does that help? Because, again, turnout's going to be a big thing here. Raphael Warnock won based on Joe Biden getting a massive, the biggest African-American number we've seen in our lifetimes. I don't think he's going to get quite that high a number, but then when you go to a runoff, everything changes again. You get down to some diehards. The turnout's going to be a lot lower for a runoff. Who does that benefit, do you think?
I don't know.
Great answer. I appreciate that answer.
The fact is that in 2022, there was the factor of Trump and certain cronies basically saying, doesn't matter, this election's rigged anyway. And, there's a certain crazy lady up in the northwest part of Georgia. And her certain congressional district was the only congressional district in Georgia that had double-digit drops in turnout from the general election to the runoff election. So you kind of wonder
that one, right?
Yeah, you kind of wonder how that happened, don't you? Really kind of figure out how that happened. But I don't know. We'll see what the factors are. The factors are going to be different this time. If Republicans don't, screw themselves over this time with just, kind of pushing that message out to the base, who knows? It could be helpful for it. It might pull them out this time, because I think it's important to remember Republicans actually did. David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler both did better than former President Trump did in those Atlanta suburbs area in the runoff than the general election. The problem was that turnout in some of these deep red areas was so bad that it just didn't match up to what turnout was able to be relatively stabilized in those Democratic strongholds. So
we are available for political consulting. Our DMs are open.
Yes.
Don't tell your voters to not go vote. Would be real high on my list.
It seems like a bad one of those things that would seem like a bad idea.
Yeah, don't do that. Let's go up to Ohio really quickly. Rob Portman's retiring. J.D. Vance is in there. Tim Ryan's running. Bless his heart, Tim Ryan's done everything except sell a kidney to try to win this race. I don't know that he could run any better than what he's ran this race. I think that +8, +9 are Ohio that we're dealing with now is still going to be too. Look, my disdain and loathing of J.D. Vance is well known. I'll lay my bias on the table. The man was drowning. I would chuck him a center block. However, I think he's going to win this race by inertia. He doesn't deserve to. He's ran a terrible campaign. That Trump Trump 8 or 9 points when he won Ohio this last. That's just too steep a hill for Ron to overcome, I think.
Yeah, we have to remember now that Ohio, it was basically the same margin that he ran with in 2016, but because of the change in the popular vote, Biden ran 3 points better than Hillary Clinton in the entire nation. Ohio was actually more to the right of the nation in 2020 than it was in 2016. It is just a very, very hard state to look at. Most polls now show Vance with a pretty standard, like 4 to 5 point lead. It shouldn't be that bad for him. I give major, major props to Tim Ryan for forcing the issue on this and making it as probably as close as you can get it. He could, in theory, it's possible he saves Marcy Kaptur this way. I wouldn't necessarily underestimate that possibility. But man, I just don't think he's going to, it's kind of in the same way. You don't see a whole lot of polls showing him above, 46, 45%. Just hard for me to see him getting that kind of extra 3 to 4% he needs to get to victory. So yeah, I think Vance, a very underwhelming margin, but I do think JD Vance is going to be the next senator from Ohio on replacing Rob Portman there.
Yeah. Let's go to Arizona. Two really messy races. Let's start with the Senate race. It looks like, what do we do with Masters? He was hot, he was cold, he was way down, then he came back a little bit. Kelly just kind of keeps going. And again, most underreported story of this whole thing, Kelly's blown away every other Democratic country and the candidate of any office in fundraising. The dude just prints money. Does Kelly have this wrapped up?
Again, you'll see we have
that
this
pause told me a lot
right now. You'll see our final ratings today on Monday with what our final call is. I can't say he's got it wrapped up. It's there. It's growing. It's not increasingly hard, but it's a little bit harder for me to see Masters winning than Kelly. I think is the best way I can put that without really giving anything away.
Yeah, fair enough. When you have one candidate that's up and down a lot and one candidate that's just been rock steady with his floor, and then the undecided starts coming in traditionally, you usually go with the steadier guy, especially when they're an incumbent. That's kind of where I fall on that one. Okay, perhaps the messiest of the governor races. Kari Lake, Hobbs. We could spend an hour on Kari Lake and all the mess involved there. Hobbs has just run a terrible campaign. I'm just talking on the merits of it. She's ran a bad campaign, and when you run a bad campaign against somebody that's really outspoken, loud, and good on camera, even though they say utterly bat crazy stuff, they say it smoothly because they're a trained television presenter. They're just smoother, and the other person runs and hides. I honestly think that's probably the difference in this, and Lake ends up winning a decently comfortable 2 or 3 points. Where are you at on it?
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest difference for Lake compared, I think, to people like Mastriano, Walker, or even Masters himself. Kari Lake is just actually good on TV. And again, I would point out the biggest difference between her and Mastriano. Lake has not let in with the Christian nationalism angle. That is a big difference. People are turned off by that. There are people who will probably be okay with, certain voting conspiracy theories who are potentially turned off by Christian nationalism. It's something that has, causes sometimes, very weird and stupid statements that Lake just doesn't make or either she believes in that or doesn't want to campaign on it and understands that, or, the fact that she doesn't necessarily go that route and she's very good at articulating herself on TV. Mastriano is very, very awkward. If you've ever seen him speak, he's not necessarily the most concise guy in the world. So, it's what it goes here. And that's props to Kari Lake. She's done, I think, I don't want to say there's been a pivot, but I would say there's been a calm down, I'd say a little bit. You don't see the yelling as much anymore. It's more,
she has message discipline. Her ideas are crazy, and I could argue that she's unfit for office on a couple levels. She has tremendous on-camera message discipline. It's always Trump, Arizona, Hobbs, media. Like
Yes.
it's almost like a bingo card. She checks it off every single interview. She has tremendous messaging, and when you have the other person running away and hiding from cameras, I think that's the difference in this race. Unfortunately for the
Absolutely.
people of Arizona, she has
Yeah.
great message discipline.
And I would agree with you that Hobbs running a pretty miserable campaign, and the fact that Hobbs is only down 1-2 and kind of running this campaign is a sign that, you know, Blake probably isn't as strong as some people are saying she is, but it's going to be enough that it's going to allow her to win.
Yeah, and if you like Arizona politics, we're going to be talking about them a whole lot next cycle because they're going to be coming for the for the senator from Arizona in the next primary.
Oh, yes.
Cinema, that's going to be a god awful mess. Let's go north real quick. Nevada. Does the Senate seat go D or red? Just give me a straight up. What do you think? This is going to be a lot closer than people thought it was. I had a credit my buddy Edgar Garcia. He's like, hey, watch that Nevada race. He started telling me last week. He's like, that Nevada race is going to be tight. You watch that thing. Laxalt win. Cortez, give me an up or down. Who do you think wins? Or trending, since you don't want to give away your final.
I think I would more rather be a statewide Republican in most races in Nevada right now than I would be a Democrat.
I'll throw you one more.
John Ralston is a very good source on this in Nevada. He's a guy who kind of understands the ballot tracking pretty well. The usual firewall that we saw in 2020 for Nevada isn't necessarily all there, as big there as it was in 2018 and 2020 in Nevada. You know, we made a change this past Thursday that I think shows a little hint there towards what we're going towards in Nevada in the Senate race. I think it shows a little hint. But yeah, I personally, if I was running a Republican campaign, I would be slightly more confident than if I was running a Democratic campaign in Nevada at this moment.
Yeah, which is very strange. If you've been, I lived in Vegas, so I've seen some of these campaigns up close. Nevada's always been a strange state. Let me throw you one more out of Nevada real quick, though. Do you think they go for ranked choice voting? It's going to be on the ballot this time.
It's one of those things that when voters see it, they like it when it's on their ballot. I think they do.
Yeah, I think the caucus thing, I think, the word has gotten toxic enough that the uninformed voter, I hate to use the term, but for lack of a better term, I think the uninformed voter is going to see caucus and just click the other one automatically. I think you'll have some of that going on. All right, Joe Szymanski, we went through a lot of material. This was a big information sandwich. What's your overall one? Is it watching the Senate? Is it watching the House? Is it the AG races that y'all been writing about? Is it the governor races? What's going to be your top line item come Wednesday morning?
What happened in those 4 key Senate races we talked about? I think in the end, that's what's going to be the big story. What happened there? What happened in Pennsylvania? What happened in Nevada? What happened in Georgia? And what happened in Arizona? I think those are going to be the key storylines when we come out of here on Wednesday morning.
Yep, and we'll have you back because you are the best at this. We enjoy it. You tell us what you think. You tell us what you know. You differentiate between the two. Always great talking to you, my friend. Enjoy the Phillies run in the World Series. It's been a while. I have no dog in that fight as a Reds fan, so I will just sit back and enjoy the Astros getting it handed to them. But Joe Szymanski, Elections Ask Daily, I mean it. Go check out those tools that they have. Make yourself a more informed voter. My friend, I appreciate it. We'll talk in a week or two and see how we did on all this.
See you later, Andrew. Thank you so much once again.
Thanks, buddy.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.